Yeah, okay. Calvin Russell is on Flip Watch. Let's actually talk about this.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in the Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're always free and available wherever you get your podcasts, whether you're watching Locked On Syracuse on YouTube or listening on your favorite audio platform. And on today's show, key Syracuse football defense position battles for fall camp for the upcoming 2025 college football season, which actually begins for Syracuse exactly 1 month from now. That's right. It's July 30th at the time of this recording. Syracuse football opens the season against Tennessee in Atlanta, Georgia on August 30th. We're almost there, ladies and gentlemen, for real games to begin. But we're going to start today's show talking about Syracuse football 2026 5-star commit Calvin Russell. And this show, or at least this segment, is not going to be about Calvin Russell, the player, and what he can bring to Syracuse, because we did a number of podcasts discussing that earlier in July when he committed to Syracuse. Now, we really haven't touched on Syracuse football recruiting in quite a while on this channel, and the reason is because, quite frankly, there hasn't been much to really say. It's been kind of quiet with Syracuse football recruiting in the past couple of weeks, which I know is kind of shocking for Fran Brown. I don't think he's necessarily sleeping. There just hasn't been too much recruiting news really out there regarding Syracuse football until this morning. Thank you, Rivals Director of Recruiting Chad Simmons, for an article he released today regarding Calvin Russell and the fact that he is already on Flip Watch. I know, right? It's shocking that a top Syracuse recruit, or commit, I should say, is on Flip Watch, because, Syracuse is just never going to ever get a commit that's highly rated that isn't going to be on Flip Watch. You commit to Syracuse, he's automatically on Flip Watch, right? His exact wording is that they're going to monitor Russell's commitment throughout the fall because schools aren't giving up on him just because he committed to Syracuse football in early July. What to make of this? And then we'll get into Calvin Russell's wording and honestly why I think this is BS. Did you really expect that Syracuse was going to get Calvin Russell and there wouldn't be an article or two out there from a national recruiting expert saying that, he's on Flip Watch? Honestly, I'm surprised that it took a month, actually less than a month, for this type of article to be released. Because whenever Syracuse gets a big commit, they're automatically on Flip Watch, right? We saw this early in the offseason with 4-star defensive line commit in 2026, Cameron Wilson, commits to Syracuse. He's there for a couple of months, committed. And then all of a sudden, there's predictions out there that he is going to flip his commitment to Nebraska. Last I checked, he's still committed to Syracuse. Such is life with Syracuse football and some of these national reporters out there. And I want to be clear, I'm not necessarily offended by this. I just think it's ridiculous because had Calvin Russell honestly committed to any of his other top schools like Oregon or Michigan was the big one, right? That was competing, or Florida State, which was in the Final Four, this article would not be out there. Let's just be honest. It's me and you talking. If Calvin Russell had committed to Michigan in early July, Chad Simmons is not writing an article about how Syracuse is going to try to flip him. He's not. How many articles are out there about Syracuse trying to flip Messiah Hampton from Oregon? Not many, unless you check a Syracuse site. Not many. It's just the nature of the business for these guys. And I should be clear here. No school is immune from flips. It can happen to literally any school at any time, especially in this day and age with the amount of money that is rumored or confirmed to be thrown around at some of these high school recruits or transfer portal commits, right? I mean, just last offseason in the 2025 recruiting cycle, we saw LSU lose the number one player in the country who just so happened to be a quarterback in Bryce Underwood to Michigan at the last moment because Michigan stepped up and gave him an offer that he simply could not refuse. So in theory, it's possible that any school could step up and technically pay Calvin Russell an offer that he can't refuse. And that's that. And then you lose him. I guess that could happen, right? No school is immune to a player flipping their commitment. It happens. But what has Calvin Russell said? Because I think it's important. He said when he committed to Syracuse, he shut down his recruitment after that. I get that there are schools that aren't going to give up, but from Calvin Russell himself, he has said he's committed to Syracuse and his recruitment is on lockdown. Those are his words, not mine. It's not my opinion. That's him saying that. That's Calvin Russell's own words. He is committed to Syracuse football. His recruitment is shut down. And we know why he committed to Syracuse, or at least the primary reason. We'll get to the money in just a second. But the biggest reason is his relationship with head coach Fran Brown. You might have heard the story already from Locked On recruiting expert, host of the Portal podcast, Brian Smith. He's been on this show plenty of times, and he has said he's interviewed Calvin Russell, and he asked Calvin Russell early on this offseason, why Syracuse? Why is Syracuse one of the teams you're really considering? Calvin Russell, you got a ton of offers out there. You're a five-star recruit. You're one of the top receivers in the nation. You can play anywhere. Why Syracuse? And he gave a very simple answer to our colleague, Brian Smith. Fran Brown. It's his relationship with head coach Fran Brown. So as long as Fran Brown remains the head coach at Syracuse, I don't think we have too much to worry about regarding Calvin Russell. As far as the money aspect with Calvin Russell, we know from On3's Pete Nakos, when he went on Q Sports Talk following the commitment of Calvin Russell, that if it was really about the money, Calvin Russell would not be committed to Syracuse football. He would have committed elsewhere. What does that tell you? It probably means that Syracuse was not the highest bidder for him. Now, I'm realistic, and we don't necessarily know the dollars that were thrown around here, but I imagine that Syracuse was at least in the ballpark financially to get him. I have a hard time believing that Calvin Russell left significant money on the table to commit to Syracuse instead of going to a school like Michigan or Oregon or Florida State, Miami, anywhere else you could have, LSU. But I don't think Syracuse was the highest bidder for him. And what else can Syracuse offer him? Well, it's pretty friendly for an offensive player, if we're being honest. It is. We saw what happened last year with Syracuse. They play in a dome, so at least 6 games a year. No weather at all. That helps wide receivers. Whereas in Michigan, you're playing in the cold for half the season. Now, there are obviously perks with other schools, At Michigan, I mean, you get to be a part of the game. But we saw what Syracuse did last year with guys like Jackson Meeks and guys like Trevor Pena. And even to a lesser extent, he didn't get the biggest role last year, but he certainly emerged. And I think, mostly think he's going to have a big year in 2025. Darryl Gill. Those guys had big seasons last year. All career years by a landslide. Those three players, none of them were even four-star recruits out of high school. None of them had the same talent profile as Calvin Russell out of high school. Now imagine what Syracuse can do with a guy like Calvin Russell with this coaching staff, assuming it stays together. Also imagine the fact that Calvin Russell is probably going to get an opportunity right away to play as a true freshman, where I don't think other schools are going to be able to offer that really to him. So overall, I'm not mad or disappointed at Chad Simmons. I mean, it's his job. Of course, he's going to publish an article about Calvin Russell, a name to monitor over the course of the season as someone who could potentially flip, because schools aren't going to give up on him because he committed to Syracuse. But deep down, we all know as Syracuse fans, because it's really just us that are talking here, we know that if he had committed elsewhere, there's no way an article like this would be published. Is there really any cause for concern right now with Calvin Russell flipping from Syracuse? Less than a month after he committed to the school? As of right now, from Calvin's words, his recruitment is shut down. But hey, comment in the comments section below. Are you worried about Calvin Russell's commitment to Syracuse? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Now, coming up, we'll transition to the 2025 college football season. You know, the season that's getting underway in a month. And we'll talk about some of the key defense depth chart battles. So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. Time to fuel up and turn it up with 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. It brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're sinking birdies or just making memories with friends, this one's a hole-in-one for your energy game. Let's be honest, some days on the course or off it, you just need that extra boost to stay sharp and energize. And golf is all about good times with good people and good flavors. Of course, the grape ginger lime flavor gives you the best parts of your clubhouse go-to without chasing down the bev cart. If you go to 5hourenergy.com today, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, you can use my promo code LOCKEDONGOLF to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36 holes, get the energizing boost you need to power through. Order transfusion-flavored 5-Hour Energy shots today. This is Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer. Let's get into the key defense depth chart battles for Syracuse football in fall camp. Now, for those that don't know, Syracuse football's defensive coordinator is Elijah Robinson, and he runs a base 4-2-5 defense. What does that mean in layman's terms? Very simple. You got 4 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, and 5 defensive backs on the field. Now, let's start with the defensive line. And similar to yesterday's podcast, when we were actually talking about the offensive line, we have not yet done on this podcast a defensive line full preview podcast. And trust me, there will be a full defensive line preview podcast at some point this offseason before we get into Tennessee week later in August. With that being said, we will go over some of the defensive line key battles to monitor, but I'm not going to sit here and burn through all the material of a defensive line podcast. Sound good? Also, the beauty of the defensive line is we can sit here and say, this is a key battle here and there are key battles, and we don't necessarily know who's going to be a starter. But pretty much everyone plays. The defensive line rotates for practically every team. Yeah, you're going to have some players play more than others, but they rotate throughout the game. You don't really see defensive linemen on the field 100% of the time. That just doesn't usually happen. Let's go with defensive tackle, and then we'll go to defensive end. Now, Syracuse brought in two, I think, pretty significant pieces at defensive tackle in the transfer portal. They got George Rooks from Boston College, and they got Chris Thomas from Marshall. Syracuse also lost Murad Watson in the transfer portal, which in my opinion is a pretty significant loss. I mean, he was a freshman All-American. I think we all would have loved to have Murad Watson back, but you know what? Texas decided to tamper, paid him a ton of money. More power to Murad Watson for leaving. I get it. I'm not mad at Murad Watson. Blame the system, if anything, for him leaving. But regardless, that's my salt for you all. Syracuse also returned a number of decent players. They got Deion Tank Wilson back. They got Rashard Perry back. And they also got Elijah Fuentes-Cundiff back. Between these 5 players of George Rooks, Chris Thomas, Deion Tank Wilson, Rashard Perry, and Elijah Fuentes-Cundiff, only 2 can start along Syracuse's interior defensive line. And if I had to guess for now, I would say it's Deion Wilson and Chris Thomas will start. But most of the players that I just mentioned have starting experience. In fact, 4 of the 5 players have starting experience. Let's start with Tank Wilson. Last year, I believe he started the first 4 games for Syracuse. Unfortunately, he got injured, but he did return for the bowl game, and he started the bowl game. I'm not going to sit here and say that Deion Tank Wilson is a lock to be a starter along Syracuse's defensive line, but I think it's highly probable that he starts for 2025. Then you got Chris Thomas. Last year, he appeared in 13 games for Marshall, and he made 42 tackles and 3.5 tackles for loss. He did not apparently start in any of those games, but he definitely got significant playing time over at Marshall. George Rooks. He started 11 games at Boston College last season. Boston College is an ACC team. In fact, if you want to flip George Rooks and Chris Thomas, I'm all ears. I certainly think that is realistic. Rashard Perry, he started 4 games for Syracuse football last season, and then he got Elijah Fuentes-Cundiff. He's probably the least likely of those 5 to at least begin the year in the starting lineup, but he did start a game in 2022, and since then, he's been a rotational player along Syracuse's defensive line. So you got 5 defensive linemen on the interior. There are 2 spots, both of which are obviously the starting spots, up for grabs. And we'll see how it all shakes out. Again, my guess, Deion Tank Wilson and Chris Thomas will be the 2 starters. But hey, agree or disagree with me? Comment in the comment section below your thoughts on Syracuse's interior defensive line. Let's go to defensive end now. I think one guy is pretty likely to start. In fact, I might put him in the quote-unquote safe category, even though under Fran Brown, no one is technically safe in their job. But David Reese, the Cal transfer, he's got a ton of experience on the edge. I think it's his 8th year of college football. Over the past 2 seasons, he has 11 sacks combined. So 11 sacks over the past 2 seasons, playing for a power conference team, transferring to Syracuse this offseason. I think it's safe to say that, at least to begin the year, David Reese is going to be a starter. So I don't think there's much of a competition there. But then there's 3 other players for 1 open spot. You got Dennis Jaquez, Kevin Jeopardy, and David Omoperiola. 3 guys, 1 spot. Who is it going to be? Comment your thoughts in the comment section below right now. All of them have a case. Dennis Jaquez started 5 games last year and had 2.5 sacks. Kevin Jeopardy started the first 5 games of last season, but then missed the rest of the year with an injury. And then David Omoperiola appeared in 12 games and started 1 for Syracuse a year ago And he was just a redshirt freshman last year. So he's pretty intriguing, not just for 2025, but also the future as a pass rusher for Syracuse football. But my best guess for the defensive line to start the year, as far as the starters, at one defensive end, you got David Reese. Then on the interior, Dion Wilson and Chris Thomas. And then the other defensive end, I'm going to go with David O. How about that? But hey, comment your thoughts in the comments section below. I do think that the defensive line is up for grabs. There will also be a full podcast further breaking down Syracuse's defensive line. Now, coming up, we'll talk about the linebackers and the secondary and the spots that could be up for grabs on Syracuse's depth chart. So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. Who will start for Syracuse at linebacker and who will start for Syracuse in the secondary? Let's break it all down here on Locked On Syracuse. But before we do so, thank you all so much for making it to this point in the podcast. I hope that means that you enjoy the Locked On Syracuse podcast. And if you enjoy it, please feel free, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel grow to reach all Syracuse Orange fans. And of course, thank you to all those who continue to like and subscribe to Locked On Syracuse each and every day. You all are truly the best. Now, with the linebacker position, fortunately, there already is a full preview podcast breaking down the linebacker position for Syracuse. And I do think we have a pretty good idea the two main starting linebackers for Syracuse football. One I'm more confident in than the other. However, that being said, I don't think that Syracuse is necessarily married to these two players as starters. It's not like we're sitting here saying one of these guys is Marlowe Wax. Like, they're guaranteed to start, pencil them in right then and there. Number one is Derek McDonald. He's a veteran. He's been with the team since 2021, and he has made 28 starts over the past 3 seasons. I think it's safe to say that he is at least going to begin the year as a starter for Syracuse. Then you got Gary Bryant, a South Dakota transfer, an FCS All-American last season. And to be honest with you, that's great that he was an FCS All-American, that he dominated at that level. But it's a tough transition. He's going from FCS football to FBS football. The better of the two is FBS, obviously. And he's not just going from FCS to a Group of 5 conference. No, he's going from FCS to a Power 4 conference in the ACC. Does that mean I'm writing off Gary Bryant, that he's going to stink? Absolutely not. Clearly, Syracuse sees something in him, and I've given the story before of guys who come from the FCS, step into the Power 4, and become All-Americans and NFL players in the Power 4. Jared Verse over at Florida State did that. That was very recently, too. So it can be done. I'm not sitting here saying that Gary Bryant is going to have a Jared Verse type impact, but you get the idea. It can certainly be done. I'm not going to write off Gary Bryant. I don't think that he is a quote-unquote lock to start, but if I had to guess right now, I'd pencil him in there as a starter. Beyond that, you got the depth linebackers. And there's a lot of competition here. The guy who I think will push early in fall camp is Anwar Sparrow. Anwar Sparrow was someone in December who initially entered the transfer portal, but decided to return to Syracuse. And we're obviously happy to have him back. Anwar Sparrow has mostly been a depth linebacker for Syracuse football, and he's been with the team since 2020, and he's actually made 4 starts for Syracuse during his time. And beyond Anwar Sparrow, you got Antoine Delorier, a true freshman, a top 20 linebacker over on ESPN in the nation in the 2025 recruiting class. And you also got James Hurd, still a young player as well. He appeared in 11 games for Syracuse last season. So I think we mentioned 5 linebackers in this segment here. You got Derek McDonald, Gary Bryant, Anwar Sparrow, Antoine Delorier, and James Hurd. I would not be surprised if all 5 of them at some point in the year started games for Syracuse football. And if you want more information about Syracuse's linebackers, there is a full podcast on this channel breaking them down. You can feel free to check that out when you're done watching or listening to this podcast. Let's get into the secondary now briefly, shall we? I think there are 3 guys that are all but guaranteed to start somewhere in the secondary. You got 2 veterans, probably will play safety, in Deuce Chestnut and Devin Grant. And then Syracuse probably has its cornerback 1 in true freshman 4-star Demetrius Samuel Jr. I think it's also likely that we're going to see Barry Buxton start in Syracuse's secondary at this point. He was at ACC Media Day. Fran Brown has raved about him. He's developing nicely. Veteran player, too. Now, as far as how it shakes out, is Barry Buxton going to be a safety? Is he going to play the star position? Remember, Syracuse, its base defense, they have 5 defensive backs on the field. So if Barry Buxton's one of the safeties, that likely means that Devin Grant plays the star position. But either way, between those 4 players, I think all of them are probably going to start for Syracuse football. So what's available? Well, you got obviously all the depth behind those guys. But as far as starting lineup, cornerback 2 is certainly a position that is up for grabs. The leading candidate right now, in my opinion, is probably Davian Kerr. He appeared in 8 games last season as a true freshman, and he started 4 of those games. Again, as a true freshman. And then you got Chris Peel, a Georgia transfer from this offseason. He appeared in 4 games for the Georgia Bulldogs last year. We have seen Georgia players come to Syracuse and thrive under Fran Brown, mainly, of course, being Jackson Meeks. Overall, with the defense, though, I think it's a little bit more predictable as far as how the depth chart is going to shake out than the offense. The defensive line is certainly something that we're going to monitor over fall camp, who plays where, because I think it's similar to the offensive line, who's going to play where exactly along the defensive front, who's going to start, even though I think we have a better idea than the offensive line. The linebacker position, I think, is technically up for grabs because, again, I don't think Syracuse is necessarily saying, Derek McDonald and Gary Bryant, you're the answer. You're going to be the Dome Patrol here. And then you got the secondary, which I think already has 4 starters. Deuce Chestnut, Devin Grant, Demetrius Samuel, Barry Buxton. But who's going to be the cornerback 2? Hey, comment your thoughts in the comments section below who you believe will be the cornerback 2 for Syracuse football. Now, as far as what's coming up on Locked On Syracuse here in the near future, tomorrow, we got 2 podcasts for you all. First, ACC Squad at 5 p.m. Eastern, and then Syracuse football players that are quote-unquote safe on the depth chart. We pretty much know where these players are going to be come opening day against Tennessee. I know Fran Brown doesn't want to consider anyone quote-unquote safe, but, I mean, again, we'll talk about Devin Grant, Deuce Chestnut, Daryl Gill. All those guys are probably going to be starters for Syracuse football this upcoming season. And then, of course, on Friday, we got Poll Friday. I listed a group of 4 veteran offensive skill players. You can check it out on Twitter at LO_Syracuse and on YouTube, Locked On Syracuse in the post section. And you can vote which of those 4 players I mentioned are going to have a big year or who's the likeliest to have a big year. So that's what's coming up on Locked On Syracuse in the near future. And thank you for making us your first listen today. Now for your second listen, you check out the Locked On Portal Show with football recruiting expert Brian Smith, who's got the latest rumors and signings each and every day. Be the most informed fan on the rapid changes to the college football landscape. Find the Portal Podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. If you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe. Tell all your friends about Locked On Syracuse, and I will see you all again soon.